Hi, this is Doug Sharp. Good to be with you. I know that you're going to think that we're shaking things up a bit here today because we are. And it's because we're doing an action update for you as we always have. And you're probably used to seeing us come to you with information that's very current and recent and things that are coming at us immediately right at this particular time. But we also feel at Canada Family Action it's not a bad idea to look back over our shoulders sometimes at history and see if there isn't perhaps some things in history that may have occurred that are instructive or perhaps informative that can help us learn a lesson there that we can then use to apply with what we're dealing with today. Well, we're in an election year coming up and we're about to select the leadership of our country. And as I was thinking about that, I remembered back to about 14 years ago when I met a man by the name of Bob McEwen. And Bob at that time shared some things with me I wanted to share with you today. Now, among other things, Bob was a member of the House of Representatives from January of 1981 to January of 1993. Now, the facts that Bob shared with me were regarding around the Second World War, just before the Second World War in the 1930s. And that was a time when the world recognized that the country that was really creating so much of the trouble at that time was Germany. So what they said about Germany then was, well, we know that you like to overrun your neighbors. So what we're going to do is we're going to create this demilitarized zone, and we're going to not allow you to put any tanks in there or any kind of armored vehicles in there. It's going to be kind of like an early warning system for us. And so they established this demilitarized zone where they weren't allowed to move into it. All the rules were clear. Adolf Hitler was then elected chancellor, and the very first thing he did, of course, as history tells us, is that he burned down the Reichstag building, or the Capitol building. And when everyone else was running around dealing with that, he took his little army of 5 divisions and decided he was going to test the response of his European neighbors with the entry into the demilitarized zone. Now, most of the soldiers that went in there with him, they had to walk at that time. They didn't even have vehicles. Times were tough in Germany in the 20s and 30s, and it was a time when things weren't really going that well for Germany. Following the World War, the First World War, there was a depression and the country was in economic ruin. People's livelihoods were shattered. The economy hadn't recovered over the years since the First World War and the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. There was rampant inflation, and it took like a barrel full of money just to buy a loaf of bread. So there was a whole bunch of things that Hitler could have focused on at that time or put his mind to, but he chose this. He wanted to test the integrity of the leadership of Europe to see what they were made of. So what he did was he marched his troops into the demilitarized zone, and all France had to do at that point was say stop. And we know now that history tells us that every soldier on that day from Germany had in their possession the actual retreat orders in their pockets. In the event that they were challenged, all they had to do was turn around and go home. But they weren't challenged at all, and the lack of response emboldened Hitler. So there happened to be a country just south of there, Austria. Now, Austria had a relationship of protection with France and Great Britain. And if Germany were to attack Austria, the deal was that France and Britain were to come to their aid. And so Hitler said to himself in the spring of 1938, you know what, I think those countries lack the leadership, not that they don't have a good military and not that they aren't good people, but they have weakened leadership. Leadership that if I decide that I'm going to go into Austria, they won't stand up, so I won't have any problem at all. Well, there was a little fella over in Britain at that same time. I know you're going to recognize this name, by the name of Winston Churchill. Now, Winston Churchill was not even in cabinet at that time, just to be clear. Much like our system of government, the parliamentary system has a cabinet selected from amongst the elected members of parliament, and Winston Churchill wasn't in the in crowd at that time, so he wasn't even allowed to be in a part of the government. But this was a man, keep in mind, who painted with his easel down by the seashore, and as a member of parliament alone with no cabinet position in government, it was widely understood and accepted that within 36 inches of that easel was still more power than all of the houses of parliament and offices of government combined. So Hitler knew exactly who Winston Churchill was. And Winston Churchill, of course, knew exactly who Adolf Hitler was. And Winston Churchill said at that time that Hitler was not making all those tanks for parades. He's up to something, and he knew it. And if we don't do something about it, he said he is going to take Austria. And of course, Hitler jumped up and down after he did and said now he's going to take Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia was surrounded to the south and the west by the German army. Churchill assures the world that Czechoslovakia is next. So all the countries of Europe then puffed up their chests and said, well, in that case, if he takes Czechoslovakia, it means war. If he tries anything there, that's it. Well, they wrote letters to each other, all the politicians, and they wrote speeches about how they were really going to do something if Hitler moved in on Czechoslovakia. And so Hitler said, well, I'll tell you what, how about if I just take this little part here, Sudetenland? Just a little part here. These people speak German, so I'll just take this little piece here. Well, that was in September of 1938. He'd taken Austria in March, and he'd moved his armies over a bunch of terrain during 1938, while all the countries of Europe kept talking about it, how he was really going to get it if he kept on acting like this. So there was so much talking going on at that time, and Hitler heard it. He said, near the end of 1938, he said, okay, y'all seem pretty upset. Why don't you come over for a visit? Come to my place. We'll talk about this. Sit down, we'll have a coffee, talk about it. He invited all the leaders down to a little place he had in the mountains by Munich. And once he got them there, he said, let me first tell you, whoa, settle down, everybody. Let me just tell you, I'm not going to take any more countries. That was pretty profound. Hey, I'm not going to take any more countries. And the Prime Minister of Great Britain, because of course he was a good lawyer, he said, Herr Hitler, would you mind putting that in writing for me? And the memoirs that were written since then about that moment in time state that Hitler literally leapt for his pen, saying, oh, sure, here you go, no problem. I will not take any more countries. There you go. Happy to do it. And so the Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain at the time, ran back home with this note. And of course, some of you might remember that part of the story. The front cover of every newspaper on the planet read in big, bold letters, peace in our time. The famous picture of the Prime Minister with that piece of paper in his hand, and he was saying, I have the Fuhrer's signature on this piece of paper. It's peace in our time. Now, everyone was so happy when the Prime Minister landed with that piece of paper. The streets were full of people cheering peace in our time. The Prime Minister couldn't even turn his car down Downing Street to the official residence. There were so many people cheering and celebrating peace in our time. So they went then to Winston Churchill and they said, hey, you know, Winston, you see, you thought that we were going to have all sorts of trouble with this fella. You know, hey, I'll tell you what do you think about the Prime Minister's trip now? I mean, he brought us peace. What do you think about that? Well, this is fairly well documented, but Churchill said, after great thought, I'm sure, he said at that point, well, the Prime Minister has faced a difficult choice, whether to choose war or shame, and he has chosen both. And so, 3 months later, Hitler not only took the Sudetenland, he also took all of Czechoslovakia, and then the entire world could see what Adolf Hitler was up to. That fall, September 1st, 1939, at midnight, Hitler marched into Poland, and that's when people began to identify it with the beginning of World War II. So in the fall of 1939 and into the spring of 1940, Hitler took all of Europe, country after country, such that by April 1940, he had occupied all of Europe. And then Britain turned to Churchill and, of course, said, historic moment, hey, Winston, how would you like to be Prime Minister now? And so they elected Winston Churchill Prime Minister. And, of course, Winston Churchill wrote in his diary that night that he went to bed that night and slept the sleep of a newborn babe, content in the knowledge that finally someone was in charge that knew what they were doing. Well, my point is this. When Hitler took Austria and was meeting with the Prime Minister of Austria and informing him that he was going to occupy his country, Hitler said, France could have stopped me with a flick of their wrist, but it can't now. Because of a lack of leadership, 55 million people died in World War II, 14 million in concentration camps, 6 million of them were Jews. Churchill said in his original address on his first day in office, he said this. He said, the Battle of France is now over, and I expect the Battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. Upon it depends our own British life and the long continuity of our institutions and our empire. The whole fury and might of the enemy must very soon be turned on us. Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. If we can stand up to him, all Europe may be freed, and the life of the world may move forward into broad, sunlit uplands. But if we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all that we have known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a dark new age made more sinister and more protracted by the lights of perverted science. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will say, this was our finest hour. So then that moment in time opened the door for the next decade where millions would die. And that's what happened. We had an opportunity in our history to ensure that the leadership that was elected did the job that we elected them to do. Our world suffered a great tragedy and a great loss because of a lack of leadership. You know, just recently I had an opportunity to read an article that was written by Pierre Poilievre. He's a member of parliament in the current Conservative government in Ottawa. And Pierre did an excellent job in painting a picture of what were the other alternatives if Winston Churchill had not in fact been available to lead at that moment in time when Europe so needed it, where the world so needed a great leader. Well, it was obvious that by history has looked at Winston Churchill and said he was absolutely critical to the survival of millions of more people. And his leadership led the world out of a very dark period of time. Well, we're in an election year here in Canada, and we have an opportunity to elect our leadership here in Canada. And I just want to encourage you to stand by your conviction and the commitment you made last month to get out and vote and select your leadership. It's so important. And you may think that oh, well, my vote doesn't count. But in our democracy, in our parliamentary system, your vote does count. And when you get out and cast your ballot, you are selecting the leadership. And leadership is just another name for influence. We all know that. And the leader that we select is going to have influence not only over our country, over our own individual lives, but our leadership of this country is going to also affect and impact the world. And so I appreciate so much you giving me this time to share this message with you, and I hope to see you on Election Day, standing beside all of your fellow Canadians, casting your ballot and choosing and selecting the leadership of this country for the next 4 years. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Doug Sharp from Canada Family Action. Feel free to send this email around, and if you haven't already signed up for our e-newsletter, please go to www.familyaction.ca and sign up the e-newsletter. We'll make sure we get out all the monthly newsletters to you from here on. Have a great day. Bye for now.